Guys, what a beautiful day it is today in Pennsylvania. I'm actually at the shop right now because fall is kicking in, and one of the things that I do every single year, doesn't matter where I am or how busy I am, I pull my Jeep into the shop over the course of a couple weekends and I completely overhaul anything that I think is going to give me trouble during the winter. In the Northeast here, when we get these winters, it tends to be pretty brutal. It's cold for 3 or 4 months straight. We've got snow and sleet and gross conditions, and I really just don't feel like working on my vehicles during those different conditions. So what I'm doing today with the Jeep is a couple very simple things. I actually just did change the fuel filters, and then I changed the transmission fluid. And the next thing that I'm gonna do after I get some parts in is overhaul the brakes and all that kind of stuff. But that's not the point of this video. What I wanted to do in this video was address one of the most common questions that I get on my Turbo Diesel XJ, the Diesel XJ conversion that's behind me. I get questions every single week about the build. And if you're not following me, take a second, hop over to Instagram, check out @TurboDieselXJ, and check out all the content there. But that's where most of my questions come in. And I often get questions around things like, was it worth it? How much did the swap cost? Was it difficult? Things like that. So I'm always getting the quote unquote normal questions. And what I wanted to do was just kind of answer one of them today. The question that I want to answer is it worth it? But before we do that, let's go over here to the Jeep. I'm gonna have to adjust some camera settings here for you guys. Today's objective was to change right here the fuel filter. There's 2 fuel filters. There's like a pre-filter here that's just a plastic filter, and then there's the main one right there. So I changed both of those, and I did try something a little bit different. Forgive the darkness for a second. I'll walk out into the light. So I'm trying this AMSOIL manual transmission fluid. I have an AX15 in my Jeep. Okay, there we go. Sorry guys, had to change the focus settings on the camera. So I normally run Redline MT90. My transmission was getting pretty loud and the shifts were kind of notchy. And you got to be careful with the AX15 because it is a brass synchronized transmission. So I'm trying this stuff because on AMSOIL's website, it says that it will not harm brass synchros. I did order more MT90 and I will get that into the transmission probably in the next month or 2. But I'm going to give this stuff a shot and see how it works out. So just giving you guys a little bit of an overview of the engine bay. Right there is the OM617. This engine fits extremely tight. I've done a ton of videos in the past on this swap. So this video is not necessarily about the swap itself, but I figured I might as well show you guys, especially people who have not seen this yet, what we're working with here. So obviously relocated the battery, got my intake. I'm actually gonna build a real intake on this thing in the very near future. HE221 turbo, intercooler is up front here. You can see there's a big front mount intercooler. Then we have a diesel Mechin 7.5 millimeter injector pump. So this thing's putting out a ton of fuel, ported head, ARP stud kit, whole 9 yards. Did my custom AC brackets up here so I could have air conditioning, remote oil filter. There's also, it's very hard to see, and I don't think you'll be able to see it behind there. Behind the TDXJ in my custom bumper here is my oil cooler. So that's pretty rad. So anyway, quick overview. This was very difficult to get this engine in this Jeep. And so that's why oftentimes people are asking me, was it worth it? And that's a really hard question to answer because that's gonna be totally dependent on so many factors that are kind of outside my scope. I don't know what your personal life is like. I don't know what financial situation is, but what I figured I would do is kind of boil it down into a couple things. When people ask me, was the diesel swap worth it? I'm gonna generally say, sure, yeah, it was worth it. Pretty cool. It's a fun thing to drive around. You know, I had a 2001 Cherokee that I had an LT1, a 350, 5.7 liter out of a Camaro. Pretty cool, but it just never did it for me. When I finally decided to do the diesel swap, I can tell you that I like this a lot more than, say, an LS swap Cherokee or an LT1 swapped, or even a 6.0 or a 6.2 liter. I mean, those things are cool, but they're just not my style per se. So generally speaking, I think it was worth it for me. So I'll boil it down this way. If you're just looking for something that's really easy, that it's a turnkey kind of swap, quote unquote turnkey swap, this is not it. Diesel swaps are not for you. If you're in a lot of debt and you have a bad financial situation, or maybe you just don't have the best finances currently, and that's not me bashing anybody, but there's a reality here is a lot of people on the internet like to say, oh, it's gonna cost you $5,000 diesel swap. I've got about 10 grand into making this thing a diesel, and that's pretty common. So if that scares you immediately when I say it's gonna cost you $8,000 to $10,000, this is not for you. This is not the right move. I definitely would not recommend it. If you have the extra money and that doesn't scare you, it might be worth it to you. If you are not very mechanically inclined, a diesel swap's not the right move for you. And that's not saying you couldn't get mechanically inclined, but the reality is, if you get scared of doing things like ball joints, if you get scared of swapping axles out, doing welding, fabricating, things like that, this is not the right move for you. So overall, if you have all of those skills and you've got the monetary capabilities to just dump 10 grand into something that really monetarily doesn't make sense, well then maybe a diesel swap is right for you. The other thing that I'm gonna say is if you do not have an area where you can dedicate a spot for your vehicle, a diesel swap is probably not going to be for you. I do all of the work on the Jeep here in the shop, and while I have access to this area in the weekends, it's pretty rad. The reality is I have to have my Jeep out of here come Monday. So I don't have a dedicated spot to keep my Jeep, and that was what made this swap way more difficult than it would have had to be. So that's the other thing. If you have a pole barn on your location, you have a nice garage, nice workspace, it's probably not a terrible idea. Overall, I'm extremely happy with this swap. I think that the OM617 is a huge upgrade over the 4.0 liter. Definitely more power with the 7.5 millimeter pump, the different turbo, front mount intercooler, ported head, all that stuff. And I would also say to people, you know, one way you can kind of justify the expense of the swap is potentially by making a page, making a social media outlet where you can showcase the build, start working with companies, do stuff like that. So if you are media inclined, you can take videos, photos, things like that. You can definitely take the edge off the swap by finding good companies to partner up with. But the reality is there's a lot more expense in a swap like this than what you might expect. So at the end of the day, I'm super pumped about the swap. I'm very happy with it. I definitely don't regret it, but I can tell you if the stuff that I just said scares you, it might be better to do something like an LS swap, or maybe you just keep the 4.0 liter and freshen it up. Maybe you pull it out and you do a rebuild on that first so you can get your feet wet, so you can understand how things work. But if what I said scares you, diesel swaps are probably not for you because there's a lot of conditions that you're gonna run into that are way more difficult than just swapping any random V8 into a Cherokee. So guys, that's just answering one question, was it worth it? To me, yes. Just recapping, this swap was worth it to me. It's checking off all my boxes, but it is a ton of work. Guys, winter's coming, so take that opportunity to get your vehicles freshened up, and I'll show some more videos answering some of these basic questions in the very near future. But if you have questions about my diesel swapped XJ, please leave them down below. Take a second to follow Turbo Diesel XJ on Instagram, and please subscribe, like, comment, all of those things. Guys, stay well, stay safe. I'll see you, and I'll show you this Jeep next time. Man, I almost forgot to show you guys this. So I also got a new toy. Take it out in the sunlight. Ooh, overexposed. Sorry about the camera settings, guys. It's really hard to operate the camera one-handed and hold this in the other hand. So yeah, that's the new toy that's gonna be making it into some content here very shortly. Uzi Pro, baby.